Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Mary Alvarez, and I'm very glad to be here with everyone and talk to you today about the importance of self-care for both alienated parents and grandparents. It's a topic that is known to everybody, but often not practiced. And so I want to help everybody understand not only the importance, but some avenues that you can explore to take care of yourself. So just a little bit about me so that you can understand how I got to be involved in the field of parental alienation. I am a licensed psychologist here in Texas. I practice both in Austin, where my practice is located, as well as in Houston. I am a former custody evaluator. I conducted custody evaluations in the Houston area for 16 years, and that's where I became very familiar with parental alienation, as it was often a big player in these very high conflict family law matters. Somebody would be making allegations about one parent in a disrupted relationship with the child in order to gain a legal advantage. And so as a custody evaluator, I saw this on a regular basis. And that led me to read the research and the science behind parental alienation, and then reach out to colleagues and join parental alienation professional groups in order to continue my education and also participate and share with others activities that I'm doing in the field of parental alienation. So while I no longer do custody evaluations, I still conduct psychological evaluations, and I do specialize in high conflict families and parental alienation, as I mentioned. I also work with reunification, not severe cases of parental alienation, but mild or moderate. And a colleague and I have created a set of programs called Resetting the Family. And this is where we work with high conflict families and help them create a new family model, address the family dynamics and the relationships, and help them to move forward and away from litigation as the venue to solve their problems. So as part of my introduction to self-care, I'm going to start off with the topic of toxic stress and parental alienation. And let's look at exactly what is toxic stress. All right, it is prolonged activation of the stress response system that we all have. Okay, we all have this ability to react to stress. And when the body cannot recover from stress, as is often the case in these parental alienation families, I mean, the stress is just ongoing, then there are consequences. And we call that toxic stress. So in a little bit more detail, here's what I'm talking about. We are all hardwired to have reactions to stress. So our brain will react quickly if we are in a dangerous situation, something that could be life-threatening. Our brains release the chemicals that help us react quickly and problem solve quickly, such as cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline, etc. And so many people know this as the fight or flight response that gives us that surge that we need in order to deal with the ensuing danger. However, once the danger has passed, let's say a car was barely down on you in the parking lot, and you had a surge of adrenaline and norepinephrine so that you could jump out of the way. Once the car has passed, several minutes later, your body will return to baseline. So the neurochemicals in your brain cease flowing in high amounts and everything returns to baseline. However, in situations where the stress is chronic, such as families where parental alienation is involved, the stress never seems to abate. And so we call that chronic stress. And what happens is the brain just continues to release those chemicals that are only designed to be released in short bursts. And we call that toxic stress. And this flows into self-care because one of the purposes of self-care is to reduce toxic stress and the insult on your brain of all of these chemicals that just continue to flow. So stress is not entirely bad, all right, but when it's in excessive amounts, it is. So patterns of stress activation. On the left-hand side, you'll see that if stress is unpredictable, extreme, prolonged, then that equals somebody who is very vulnerable. They are highly sensitized to other environmental factors. And what ends up happening a lot of times is people overreact to even slight things that normally, if you didn't have chronic stress, wouldn't cross your radar. And so you see this overreactivity as a result of unpredictable, extreme, prolonged periods of stress. However, if the stress is predictable, moderate in level, and controllable by your own actions, then that's tolerance and resilience. Those types of things make us stronger, make us more resilient. So eliminating stress altogether is not the goal. It's creating ways for the stress to be predictable, moderate, and controllable. Of course, parental alienation rarely meets that criteria in a family. And so taking care of yourself through self-care is the purpose of my presentation. So if you have paper and pencil handy, which I'm sure a lot of people do to jot down some notes, go ahead at this point, and from 1 to 10, I want you to rate yourself on the amount of toxic stress in your life. All right, so 1 being low, that you have very little toxic stress, and 10 being high, and any number in between. So take a moment, jot down your number, just to self-evaluate, just so I can get you guys grounded as we continue through this presentation, and have you have an anchor, so to speak, to anchor yourself to something relevant here. Okay, so moving into self-care. Similarly to the slide before, go ahead now that you have rated yourself on toxic stress, which I imagine a lot of people are at least moderate, if not moving towards the 8 and 9, maybe even 10 level. So now let's look at self-care. How much do you devote of your day, energy, and resources to self-care? 1 being very low devotion to self-care, and 10 being very high, meaning you are involved in self-care activities every day. So take a moment and jot down a number. And I would imagine that for most people in the audience this morning, you have a relatively high number for toxic stress and a relatively low number or lower number for your devotion to self-care. And therein lies the problem. And so I want to help you commit to taking better care of yourself, which will pay off in the long run for these long-lasting, years-long, sometimes parental alienation situations. So when a child rejects a parent or a grandparent unjustifiably, it can be emotionally crushing. And I want to acknowledge that it is devastating to parents and grandparents, when a child or a grandchild rejects either completely or at least partially, because that's just not the way things are supposed to happen. In our world, families stay together and stay connected, and then grandchildren come along and just expand the family. So the emotions that I find in parents and grandparents who have some level of parental alienation in their family is they feel intense emotions such as the following: hopelessness, i.e., no hope that life will be better; helplessness, nothing will improve your situation; despair, which is distress and anguish, again, 2 very powerful emotions; anxiety, chronic worrying, which we call rumination, where you just have thoughts that circulate in your head automatically. You don't sit and call them into your head to think about, they just are there all the time, and you just ruminate over and over and over about something. Anger, and a step up from anger is feeling enraged. And then it's not unusual at all for parents and grandparents to have moments of clinical depression and then experience what we call grief and loss. And this sometimes catches people by surprise because we normally associate grief and loss with a death. But I'm going to show you how grief and loss also applies in terms of parental alienation when you've lost the relationship. or the relationship has been severely damaged between the parent, grandparent, child, grandchild. So here's what it looks like, the grief and loss in parental alienation. Loss of a parent-child relationship, loss of a grandparent-child relationship, loss of a complete family, loss of a complete extended family, loss of hopes and dreams as parents and grandparents, loss of shared parent-child history, creating memories, creating, moments together, loss of making memories, and loss of shared grandparent-child history. Again, making memories with grandparents, extending your psyche to the much bigger whole, not just immediate family, but extended family. So if you take a look at the 5 stages of grief from Kubler-Ross and Kessler, you will see that this applies to parental alienation because stage 1, denial. When a child or grandchild starts to reject you, or you haven't even had an opportunity to get to know a grandchild, for example, most people start off with shock. Life makes no sense. That's not the way things are supposed to happen. Nowhere did we prepare ourselves for an eventual fractured parent-child, grandparent-child relationship. So there's a lot of denial, followed by anger and pain, very predictably. Again, life is not supposed to be this way. Why is it this way? Who is interfering? Who is in charge? Who is making choices that I don't want to be made? And then bargaining. And this involves a thought process where in yourself you think, well, if only I get to see my child more, or I can have a relationship with my grandchild, then I will, and then you fill in the blank. What will you do? And a lot of times this bargaining involves spirituality and making bargains with God, to try and help deal with the overwhelming sadness at not having a relationship. Then there is a period of depression, and this can vary from short-term to moderate to even long-term depression in the grief and loss continuum. Lastly, followed by acceptance. And what I want to stress is this does not mean that you are okay with the circumstances or the situation of not having a fully developed relationship with your child or grandchild. That's not what acceptance means. But it means that you press on, you carry on, and you continue to live in this new reality. And the new reality is there's a fracture between you and a child. So that's how grief and loss applies to parental alienation. And hopefully you will have found yourself somewhere, in those 5 stages. But know that there is an end, there is acceptance, and the ability to carry on. So essentially, self-care is one of the best gifts you can give yourself. It's a powerful method to deal with losing a relationship with a child or grandchild. So to define that just a little bit more, you'll be better able to endure the ongoing family law litigation if you take care of yourself. And so parents who are involved in this know that it can be arduous, it can be life-sucking, and it can be long. Some cases take years, and it's extremely expensive, which also then creates other additional worries and anxieties about money and being able to care for the other financial obligations you have in your life. But if you take care of yourself, you have more energy and reserve power to deal with a prolonged family law case. Or a child who partially rejects you, but you still spend time with that child. If you take care of yourself, you can better endure this scenario as well, so that the loss doesn't feel as cutting. And finally, taking care of yourself helps you endure the total loss of a relationship with a child or grandchild. So there's, again, different scenarios. Some individuals are partially affected by parental alienation. The child is definitely rejecting, but there is still some modicum of a relationship. And then there are parents and grandparents for whom there is no relationship whatsoever. So that would be, total alienation. So it's okay to live life as in self-care, despite the heartbreak of not having a normal parent-child or grandparent-grandchild relationship. And self-care is important in order to continue to live life. So I'm going to repeat this with this next slide and ask you to just pause. And I'm going to pause here. What do you think about what I just said? It's below. It's copied from the previous slide. It's okay to continue to live life despite the heartbreak of not having a normal parent-child relationship or a normal grandparent-grandchild relationship. All right, let's move into the nuts and bolts of self-care then. I have divided, I guess, self-care into 5 different categories. Now, this is not exhaustive, but this is the way that it made sense to me to kind of structure it. So the first slide contains 4 of the 5, including physical self-care, emotional self-care, professional self-care, using relationships as part of your self-care, and finally, advocacy work is also conducive to self-care. Taking your stress and your angst and your anguish and trying to make a difference, in the world of parental alienation. Self-care is all about creating balance. All right. It's not that you shouldn't continue the legal fight in the family law system. It's not that you shouldn't long for your child or grandchild, but there has to be a balance. If that's all you do, you're unbalanced and you are prone to anxiety and depression and despair and hopeless, helpless, etc. So there's a way to take care of yourself and feel okay about it, not guilty about taking care of yourself, as well as continue your march towards reuniting with your child or grandchild. So we're going to start with physical health. All right, and I've divided physical health into 6 categories, and we'll take a look at each of them briefly. And these are things that we all have been presented to, or we've read about, or individuals have talked to us about, your family physician, for example. But let's just go through them again because they are important, and that's the reason that these same topics keep recurring in our lives. So let's start with good sleep habits. All right. What does this mean? It means keep a sleep schedule, including on the weekends. It is not true that if you give yourself an extra 2 or 3 hours of sleep on a Saturday or Sunday, that somehow you make up for lack of sleep the other 5 days of the week. Our bodies don't function that way. It's just best to stay on schedule. If you normally get up at 7, try and get up at 7 or within 30 minutes of 7, on the weekends. It actually helps sustain your circadian rhythms rather than disrupt them. And you won't be any more tired if you keep your same sleep pattern schedule. Pay attention to what you eat and drink, especially alcohol consumption. All right, alcohol consumption may temporarily make you drowsy or bring down your anxiety and your rumination, your worries enough to help you fall asleep. But then the effects don't last and you end up waking up in the middle of the night. Plus it's extra calories and sugar and all of those things that don't bode well for our bodies and diabetes. Reduce blue light a couple hours before bedtime. So before computers and iPads and phones, we didn't talk about blue light. The only thing we had was the TV to talk about. So reduce screen time. Now, does that mean you have to shut the TV off completely? No, it doesn't. But reduce the noise, which includes the volume and the lighting in the room, a couple hours before you really want to go to bed. And in your mind, you may be thinking right now, well, I don't have 2 hours to devote to winding down before bed. Okay, just push that to the side and be open, to these other suggestions, because in totality, the different things I'm going to be presenting here this morning all improve self-care. And so don't reject anything too prematurely. Wait till we get all the way through. So create a restful environment. Keep your room cool, dark, and quiet, and keep your room for sleeping. Don't conduct other activities in your room. You want your room to be associated with sleeping. So no work in your room. Don't use your bed as a table and eat in your room. Don't socialize in your room. Just keep your room dedicated to sleep. limit daytime naps, and include physical activity in your daily routine. That doesn't make you more tired, it actually gives you more energy. And manage your worries by setting aside a different time than nighttime to think about the things that worry you. And I do this with my clients in my practice. So we will talk about getting a journal or some kind of a notebook, and you set aside time before bedtime and you write down all the things that are still on your mind, and you give yourself permission to stop thinking about them and allowing them to influence your physical well-being at night. And you'll pick it up in the morning. You can open it up and review the list that you wrote and carry on with thinking about and trying to create action plans or whatever it is you're trying to do. And this actually has been very powerful to helping adults reduce the rumination at night in order to foster better sleep. All right, so let's move on to exercise, which is part of physical care. So exercise increases endorphins, and those are our feel-good natural chemicals. So we all have them, they are there, let's use them, all right? So in a little bit more detail, what this means is our endorphins in our brain reduce stress. That's a good thing, all right? Exercise increases endorphins and the release, as does things such as laughing. So I put that in there to show you that, just engaging in different behaviors besides exercise also increases the release of endorphins in your brain. And the endorphins absolutely have a marked decrease in your stress. Now, does it last for 3 weeks? No, which is why you need to do things that maintain the release of endorphins. You need to continue to create ways to laugh and have a good time. That's self-care. You need to be committed to regular exercise in order to release the endorphins. So what research has shown us is that even 30 minutes a day is beneficial. And I put up a pickleball game. That's my new sport. I'm really enjoying it. But you don't have to do something as intensive or aerobic as pickleball is. You can do things that are low impact, such as exercise classes that involve some hand weights, for example. It doesn't involve running. It doesn't involve, moving quickly like you would on a tennis court or a pickleball court, but it still provides benefits and endorphins are still released, as well as low impact such as swimming. That's a great overall body sport, and it's really, really gentle on your bones and joints. As we get older, those things don't work as well as they used to. So swimming is another great way to achieve lots of bang for very little buck. All right, so that is exercise. The third category under physical self-care is the power of nature. All right, so what does that mean? The power of nature. What we know from the research is that nature increases life satisfaction. Just getting outside and hearing the sounds that you don't normally hear, sounds very different from TV and your devices. It also provides vitamin D. The sunlight is our primary source of vitamin D. It decreases blood pressure, studies have shown, just getting out into nature. That could be walks, that could be sitting, that could be, gardening, that could be, any variety of activities, but it's outside. What else does nature do for us? It decreases inflammation, which is huge. All right. We know that inflammation is related to a variety of serious health conditions, such as heart disease, diabetes, bowel disorders, such as Crohn's disease. It's related to arthritis and 3 cancers specifically in the digestive tract, which would be the colon, the liver, and the pancreas. So inflammation is not friendly to us. Getting outside and spending some time outside doing things in the open air decreases inflammation. Getting outside also increases sleep quality, and it decreases stress, anxiety, and depression. So collectively, there's lots of good reasons to get outside and do something different in order to promote your self-care. All right, the topic of breathing. And when I talk about breathing, People likely feel or think in their heads, well, breathing, okay, it's not complicated. It requires no equipment. People don't even know you're doing it because it's an automatic survival mechanism that's hardwired in our brain. We don't try and breathe, we just breathe. So how could it be helpful? Since it seems so low level and basic, which it is, how can it be powerful? How can it be part of self-care? Well, let's first of all go through some of the proper breathing techniques. Be aware of your breathing. Again, it's an automatic function, that is promoted by our brainstem. Inhale through the nose. All right, so proper breathing is inhaling through the nose until you feel your lungs expand. So I want you to do that right now. All right, right now as I'm talking, pull in as much air as you can. And when you feel like you can't pull in any more air, try a little bit more. And you will really feel your lungs inflate and push against your diaphragm. It's uncomfortable because unless we're doing something very, very aerobic, we don't need our full lung capacity to function. We can function on about a third of our lung capacity just in everyday activities. And so you can really feel it when you're not exercising and you're intentionally filling your lungs. Okay, now exhale through your mouth if you didn't already. So it's in through your nose and exhale through your mouth. Each breath should be inhale to exhale about 10 seconds. So we're looking at about 5 seconds of inhaling oxygen. That's about what will fill up your lungs, followed by 5 seconds of exhaling to empty your lungs. And so if you take 10 deep breaths, just 10, it should take about 1 minute and 40 seconds. So I'm going to pause here and we're just going to do 5. All right, I want you to count to yourself, sit back. All right, and count 5 in, 5 out, and do it 5 times. And I'm just going to sit back for 50 seconds. Okay, that was about 50 seconds. So I'll ask a question you can just answer in your head. How did that feel? Could you feel the difference, in really pulling air into your lungs to inflate them when you're not actively involved in something strenuous? It feels kind of weird, but that's how you know that you're inflating your lungs. So the purpose of deep breathing, again, is tremendous, even though it's very low level as far as you don't need equipment and you don't need any special training. But what happens under stress conditions, which parental alienation creates much stress, is the oxygen in our system is rerouted to the most important organs that will sustain life, being our heart, our brain, and our lungs, for example. And so the areas that are not essential for life, like muscles, okay, minus the heart, extreme, tissues on our hands and feet, in areas like that, the extremities are robbed of oxygen because it has to be reallocated towards the life-sustaining parts of our body. And so that just exacerbates stress because now our muscles are tense and tight and it's not receiving enough oxygen in order to relax and let the muscle fibers, step down several notches. And so deep breathing replenishes oxygen in ways that the whole body can benefit, not just the life-sustaining organs. And so it really is a very, very critical part of dealing with stress. And it's so easy to do, and no one has to know you're doing it, unless you make lots of noise breathing in and out. You can do it in your car. You can do it sitting in class. You can do it at work. You can do it in a meeting, and it will have results. So this next slide that I'm going to show you is a very beautiful scene. All right. Take a look at this, and I want you to focus on the colors, the serenity. Maybe you enjoy the forest part of it, or the flowers in the front, or the mountains in the back, or the water feature, you know, in this very beautiful picture. Sit back, and for the next 2.5 to 2 and 45 minutes, you are going to hear some meditation music. And I just want you to only focus on some aspect of this image and practice your breathing for the next 2.5 minutes. And I'm just going to sit back while you do that. Okay, so that was just 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes and 45 seconds of meditation calming music. And I'm going to ask you and answer in your head, you know, how was that for you? Were you able to clear your mind of the intrusive thoughts, the worries, the anxieties, the rumination, in order to focus on one of the images and then practice your breathing? If you did some of the time, that's great. Okay, no one's going to be able to master this, you know, the first time out of the gate. Things like this take practice. But I promise that if you engage in some of these self-care behaviors that I've been talking about here, it will pay off big time. And you will find yourself happier with more energy and more resources. And still, you're not going to lose sight of a relationship that you want to recover. So what about hobbies and self-care? We generally had hobbies when we were younger and we didn't have children, or we were younger and we did things in groups with people. But as we get older, do you still maintain your hobbies? Well, let's look at what the research shows are the benefits of hobbies for self-care. So we know that hobbies decrease anxiety and stress. So engaging in something that is pleasant and pleasing decreases anxiety and stress while increasing coping abilities, mental productivity, and positive feelings. And so, that's a great combination. The bad stuff decreases and the good stuff that we want increases. So hobbies is something that most people easily give up. If you have limited time, limited energy and resources, one of the first things to be crossed off the list is hobbies. But I want to stress that even engaging in 20 minutes a day of a hobby, or if you can't manage every day, then 30 minutes every other day of a hobby will have profound impacts on your mental health and part of self-care. So there are many, many, many hobbies, right? This is not an exhaustive list, but just to stimulate some thinking on your part, I put together a short list of 5. Reading, cooking. Cooking can be very relaxing because it's methodical and it's something that is structured. Games, game night, game with adults, not just engaging in, online games where you play against yourself or the computer. Gardening, which also then gets you out in nature. And so it's like a two birds with one stone, kind of hobby. Travel, and that doesn't mean you have to travel internationally. It means that you can go do things locally that you've never done before. You might have certain things right in your geographical area that would be very interesting to go see or spend some time doing. So that's just a short little presentation about hobbies. But again, just because it's short, don't underestimate the power of hobbies. See what you can do to include something that you enjoy doing. All right, so let's move on to eating better, another way of physically taking care of yourself. And of course, similarly to, health issues, we hear a lot about eating. And so it's not an unfamiliar topic, but do we engage in eating better on a consistent basis? I would say that, most people eat better sometimes and worse other times. What are the benefits? All right, here are 5 really important benefits to having a better balanced, healthier diet, not having the processed sugar and the high carbs and things like that. It improves your immune system, and I think we all know this, and it improves your ability to recover from illnesses. So number 1 and number 2 go hand in hand. You have a stronger immune system, therefore you are better able to recover from illnesses and or only sustain a lighter version of the illness. You just feel better. Once you get some of those toxins of the processed food additives and sugars and things like that out of your system, you just feel better. You have more energy and you sleep better. So those are 5 very powerful reasons to eat better. But we all know the processed sugar in items tastes really good. Okay, so it's not always easy, but please aspire, to eating better and giving it a shot and then documenting how it makes you feel. So those are the benefits, but what are some other benefits in decreases of certain things? Our blood pressure improves or decreases. Heart disease, risk of, decreases. Cholesterol, of course, decreases. And just other medical illnesses. So there's just win-win-win all the way around about eating healthier. And when you are involved in a very emotional situation, such as parental alienation, and your energy is going towards a family law case or gathering documents for your attorney or other activities, related to your child, it's really difficult to make sure that you eat better. You have to think about and prepare and buy foods that you can have on hand, because it's very easy just to grab something at a drive-through. A better option at least is to pick up some of the prepackaged fresh meals that most supermarkets offer these days. That could be a compromise. All right, so just a short little blip on foods. So that completes our physical self-care. So now let's move into emotional self-care. What does that mean? So emotional health involves things such as self-acceptance. if you can accept yourself as you are, who you are, warts and all, the good, the bad, the ugly, that is an emotionally healthy thing to do. Does it mean that you don't aspire to improve in certain ways or decrease bad habits in other ways? No, it doesn't. But do you overall accept who you are and you are okay with who you are? Emotional health includes resilience. And we talked about that with the toxic stress, how all stress is not bad if it's manageable and predictable and in moderate levels. Stress can be good for us because it builds our resilience. And resilience is part of emotional health. Self-confidence is part of emotional health. And it doesn't mean that you cross into narcissism, that you are so confident that you present as grandiose and narcissistic. It just means that you have a healthy dose of self-confidence. You believe in yourself and you're not afraid to make mistakes and you're not afraid to learn from mistakes and you're not afraid to try things, even if you might fail. So it's abandoning the fear of failure and moving into self-confidence and being able to manage intense emotions. All right, that is also part of emotional health because we all have intense emotions. We all have anger. We all have moments of despair. Some people, it falls into clinical depression. We have those intense emotions. Can we manage them? It's not to avoid them, but once we have them, what do we do with them? And what we do with them as far as management is part of emotional health. So let's talk about some ways to improve emotional health based on what I just presented. All right, so let's talk about the fear of the unknown. All right, which is an intense emotion. So with respect to that particular category, the fear of the unknown elicits a lot of anxiety and angst for us. And for some people, the fear of the unknown paralyzes them. They just simply don't take risks, even risks that are worth it. And I'm not talking risky behavior that could put your life in danger or somebody else's in danger. It's just doing things where you're not entirely sure of the outcome, but you have a pretty good idea. But something could still go awry, but it won't go awry in a dangerous way. All right, so the first aspect of conquering the fear of the unknown is just to understand your fear. Ask yourself, what is the fear about? And that requires some internal dialogue. Find the cause. What is the cause of your fear? Is it something that you actually did experience? You were publicly humiliated when you stood up and asked a question at a conference, for example. What was the cause of this particular fear? Question the fear. Is it valid? Is it legitimate? Is there any basis for it? Of course, part of you is going to say, well, of course there is. But try and at least find some reasons why the fear isn't valid, why it isn't justified. Accept failure. Part of dealing with a fear of the unknown is to be ready to accept failure. And as I mentioned, there's some people that won't try anything for fear of failure, and they just live in a state of paralysis. Be willing to just let go. Sometimes you just can't conquer certain things. You don't have to be afraid of it, but you just let go of the notion that you're ever going to conquer it and be okay with not conquering it, and it's not a fear anymore. And then this notion of mindfulness, that's something I'm going to go into here in just a little bit, so I'll kind of leave it alone right now. But being mindful, and that means a real internal look at yourself, in this case of the fear. So moving on to self-acceptance, which is part of emotional health. Here are some categories or some elements that represent self-acceptance. So embrace what makes you unique. All right. We all have things about us that people like and people don't like. That's what makes us unique. It's okay to be different enough, and embracing what makes you unique is really powerful. Let go of the things that you can't change. Now, I'm not referring to letting go of this parental alienation life or nightmare that you may be living, but you can let go of certain things that you absolutely have no power over. You can't control people. You can't control the other parent. You can't control, as a grandparent, your in-law, for example, or your adult child, for example. Identify your strengths. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment. And I want you to, in your head, think of 3 strengths that you have as a person. 3 character traits or personality traits. Okay, I hope everyone could come up with 3 because you all have more than 3. But if you struggle to come up with 3, then this should be a little, bell in your head that this is something that you need to pay attention to. This is part of self-care, is self-acceptance. Set goals. Setting goals allows us to master goals and achieve goals, and that's always a good feeling, right? Set small goals. You don't have to start with the most difficult, long, arduous goal. Just set small goals. Celebrate your accomplishments. All right, so let's use the food example. Let's say that for 3 days in a row, you did not have high sugar content foods and you really focused on having healthier foods, although you did slip in, some yogurt or something like that has some processed sugar, but certainly not cookies and cakes and candies. We'll celebrate that. Most people would dismiss this notion of what I'm discussing right now because it just seems that we should not need to recognize our accomplishments. We should be more progressive than that. But we are, by and large, just basic humans who need to acknowledge accomplishments, no matter how much education you have or how far you've come in your life. Plan ahead. Planning ahead helps you feel better and feel more in control, which in turn leads to improved self-acceptance. Think positively. Again, this is another category that lots of people just dismiss or don't recognize and think that it's just fluff. But actually, depression and anxiety, both of which exist in individuals who are fighting this parental alienation scenario, thinking becomes distorted when you are anxious and depressed. And so trying to reroute your thinking and recover your thinking and move away from the distortions is really, really critical. And so trying to find something positive in a situation, no matter how minute, it's an exercise that makes you stop and look internally, all right, and break the cycle of the distorted thinking. And then be kind to yourself. We're kind to other people, which is great, but what about being kind to yourself? Creating ways to be good to yourself, to do something that makes you feel good. All right, resilience. I've mentioned this several times, but it's part of emotional health. So how do we increase resilience? Become more self-aware. All right, find a purpose. Now, your purpose may be recovering your relationship with your child or grandchild, which is fine. But do you have other purposes in life as well? If that's the only way you identify yourself as somebody who is trying to recover a relationship, then you're incomplete because there's many other things in life that are purposeful. So keep, the purpose of recovering your relationship with the child, but also be mindful of other purposes that you have. Do you have other children? Do you have other grandchildren? You're a neighbor? Or you're a sibling to somebody, maybe you still have parents, etc. You have a purpose in many, many, many other ways. Maintain relationships. And I have a whole section on relationships, but we are a social being. Humans we're not hardwired to live in isolation. Maintain relationships improves resiliency. Practice mindfulness, which I'm going to get into next. And all of these things increase resilience and are part of self-care, ways that you can feel and be stronger inside. So this notion of mindfulness, is something that is relatively new, or at least it's being discussed and talked about more regularly now than it has in the past. So mindfulness is comprised of different attitudes, and I've listed a few of them. But it's really being mindful of, the following things that we're going to talk about and looking inside yourself in a deliberate, thoughtful way. All right, so one mindful attitude is to be non-judgmental. And that's not always easy, so just be honest with yourself. And some people are very non-judgmental, and other people are very judgmental. So you have to figure out where you fall, on that continuum. But be mindful to be non-judgmental. Everybody has a story. We don't know everybody's story. We don't know why they're doing what they're doing. And unless you know all of that information, be non-judgmental. Be patient. Patience is, I think, in short supply. We're a very hectic, go, go, go kind of society. Certainly technology makes things go very quickly. We become impatient when we don't have the app load immediately, the website load immediately, and it factors into our daily life in ways that don't involve technology. So practice patience. Mindfulness also involves trust. When you're involved in parental alienation, your notion of trust is shaken because what you trusted used to be, or you thought would always be, is no longer the case. And so again, even though trust can be related to parental alienation, it can extend to other areas of your life, and you can find yourself with decreased trust in many other ways, just based on something that went very much awry. A child's relationship was disrupted with you that you never ever imagined. Mindfulness includes letting go, and that's been a theme, a few different times throughout my presentation. Just letting go of things that you have no control over, that will not change no matter what you do, followed by a very powerful mindful attitude called gratitude. Being thankful and grateful for many things in your life that are going well, that you do have influence over. Again, go back to that slide that I presented in the very beginning of balance, with the rocks, placed in certain ways so that there was balance, in the system. So taking care of yourself is about creating better balance as much as anything. All right, so what about social, family, life, spirituality, and relationships and things like that? This is part of self-care. And as I mentioned, we are not hardwired to be isolative. Humans are hardwired to interact and be social, part of a family, part of a tribe, part of a much bigger society. And so when depression and anxiety and parental alienation start to tug at you in ways that create isolation, awareness is the first property of this. You have to be aware that this is happening and then make the effort to create a different outcome. So here are the things that relationships provide. They provide support. All right, being with other people feels supportive. Whether or not you all are experiencing parental alienation, certainly connecting with people who are experiencing the heartbreak of this is helpful, but you can also find support among people who don't have that as part of their life. Comfort. Relationships provide comfort. They just make you feel better. When you get out with people, even if you don't talk about anything extreme or important or particularly dense, just being with people is comforting. Just being in a group is comforting. It provides companionship. All right. Again, we're not designed to isolate. So just being with one other person provides companionship. Communication provides conversation. It also provides reality checks. And so this takes different forms. Reality checks can be the sort that if you're in a very deep relationship with somebody and you have the trust and confidence in each other to be truthful, then you can call each other out on certain things that are distorted. And with the notion, trust that nobody's going to get their feelings, widely hurt. Reality checks are important. And then relationships help motivate you. It just gives you that internal energy, that internal mechanism that just helps you put one foot in front of the other. And especially people who are depressed, want to isolate. That's one of the features of depression, is isolating and letting go of socialization and activities that were once enjoyable, etc. And so pushing back against depression involves making yourself get out there and stay connected to people. It's hard, but you come back and you feel just a little bit better, after you return from socializing. So the fifth area that I wanted to talk about that promotes self-care is advocacy, especially with this group that involves parental alienation. So advocacy, can involve many different things, but I just put four, top contenders here. Legislative advocacy. And so in the field of parental alienation, there are those that take the grief and loss of being alienated from a child or partially alienated from a child or grandchild, and they turn it into legislative action and trying to educate both state and national legislatures who are in charge of making laws and voting on things that will benefit society. Founding a nonprofit foundation, for example, that's another way to advocate for a cause. Create a nonprofit and use that nonprofit to achieve your goals and your objectives. It can be very powerful. Support others. If you don't want to get involved in legislation, creating a nonprofit seems too daunting. Just support other people and vice versa. Have them support you. And literally, you can hold somebody's hand. You can hold somebody who's new to this arena of parental alienation. If you've been in it for several months or years, you can help them just by being a good listener, just by encouraging them, to continue to put one foot in front of the other. And then educate others. That's another way to advocate. And educating others can mean educating parents. It can mean educating professionals such as judges, family law attorneys, mental health professionals, school personnel, pediatricians. There's lots of ways to educate people about the science and research of parental alienation, because we have the science and we have the research that now solidly indicates that parental alienation exists. It's not just, something that is not supported by science and research. We have that. So educating others is another way to use the grief and loss that you are experiencing in a positive direction to give back. So there are some psychological advantages of advocacy activities, and these include empowerment. So when you are involved in advocating for others or advocating your cause, it's empowering. It feels good, to get out there and make a difference. It helps you find a purpose. When parental alienation can often feel like there's no end in sight, or there is an end, but it's not the end that you want. The relationship between you and the child or the grandchild is not going to heal expeditiously like you want it to. Advocating helps you find a purpose despite your own personal circumstances. It helps you remove barricades. And there have been lots of barricades in the field of parental alienation. And science and research has definitely helped, remove some of those barricades, but not enough people understand, the science and research. So advocacy continues in that area. It will help you feel proud of yourself. You're doing something that makes a difference. And it helps you use your voice. Because one of the fastest ways to feel ineffective and depressed is to not feel that your voice matters, that what you have to say, your experiences, your words actually matter. And advocating is a way to use your voice and feel that empowerment of being able to matter. And your voice and your words and your sentences really do make a difference. So as I conclude here with this, self-care, presentation, I want each one of you to really take a moment and commit, to improving your self-care. If you are ahead of the curve and you actually are engaging in some or many of these different ways to take care of yourself that I've been discussing, that's great. Try and add one more. If you are somebody in the audience who now recognizes how little you really do take care of yourself, then commit to just 2 things. Don't look at this presentation as I have a list of 15 things that I need to do. Okay, that just creates a different stress that you don't need. Just commit to 2 things. You'll read a book or a few pages of a book every other day, for example, and you're going to add chicken to your diet and remove red meat. Just 2 things. That's it. And then commit to, in a couple weeks, adding something else, or increasing your reading time, or, increasing, something in your diet in a way that will promote self-care and health. So I want everybody to sit back again. I'm going to show you another beautiful image of mountains and wildflowers. And I want you to focus on something in the image, whatever seems to really capture your attention. I want you to try very hard to rid your mind of thoughts, all right, even related to this presentation. I know that there's a lot of information here, and you might be, trying to review some of it in your head. Try and have, to the best of your ability, a blank mind as you visually focus on something in this image. And then there's another 2.5 minutes of very meditative, relaxing music that I want you to allow to just fill you as you are focused on something visually pleasing and trying really hard to not have thoughts, okay? To just focus on your breathing. 5 seconds in through your nose, 5 seconds out through your mouth, all right? Don't count to the degree that you are missing the visual and the music, but just get in some kind of a breathing pattern. That is absolutely sufficient. All right, so everybody sit back. Okay, So I hope this last little exercise just kind of help pull everything together for you and leaves you in just a state of a little bit calmer, a little bit more hopeful, and a little bit more dedicated to taking care of yourself so that you can best endure the challenges that you have had, and will continue to have to some degree into the future. So in conclusion, I just like to end with a quote. If I can get this, there we go. So this is from the philosopher John Locke. The care, therefore, of every man's soul belongs unto himself. So essentially, taking care of yourself is in your hands, and what you do with it, the more you do or the less you do, will pay off more or less. So please commit to taking care of yourself, because you will find the benefits to be extraordinary. Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here, and take care.